Awesome. Well, hi Tom. How are
Hello,
you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling I'm feeling quite energized. We're having a lot of interesting chats about people's offsites coming. There seems to definitely be a trend around the sort of back to school time of year that teams getting together. So lots of interesting conversations about where businesses and teams are at and why they're gathering. So yeah, enjoying that. And I'm in the lovely city of Bath today. So yeah, enjoying that environment. Welcome to everyone who's watching this, either live or on demand, back on our YouTube channel or wherever else you may be finding this. I have known the lovely Tom Hall for quite a few years now, and across a period of time involved in sort of mobile media, I think, and then also at Pearson, and now also at Lego, and all of the world of ed tech as well, between all of those places. So really fantastic to have you on WorkTripp introducing Tom, and yeah, looking forward to getting into your thoughts around how to engage teams, what you've experienced over those different roles, and yeah, let's get into it. But before all that, how are you and where are you as well?
So I'm very well, thank you. I'm fairly rested. I've had 2 weeks out. I work for a Danish company, so July is kind of the time when everyone takes their big break, and it's a lot easier if you sort of fit your schedule around that because when you come back in August, things are busy and everyone's straight back to it, and it's back to school. And we're thinking about September offsites and gatherings, so the pace is picking up. But I've had 2 very nice weeks away. And I'm dialing in from North Yorkshire. I'm actually sat at home waiting for a Chinese visa to hopefully be delivered to me today, which means that on Sunday I can get on a flight to Shanghai for the first time in nearly 4 years. So
Wow, really,
that's all
that
quite
long?
exciting.
That is exciting. And I'm imagining in your role, have you had many of these visa just in time moments, or is this the first?
This is I've had lots. This is the one where it feels a bit. It feels quite tight this time. I had a passport moment just in time earlier this year when I had to get a new one issued and hadn't quite realised how tight the window was. So I'm on a bit of a roll with passports and visas right now, and I'm hoping that my luck continues and I can get
Keep,
that flight. And then
keeps things exciting, doesn't it?
yes, keep things exciting. But I'll be seeing my team, and I haven't seen them on their ground since January of 2020 before the world changed a lot. So I'm super excited to get back and see a country that I love personally, but also see my team who we just haven't been together with customers on the ground. And that's when much of the magic happens when you are together and you're kind of co-experiencing something. So I'm really looking forward to it. So fingers crossed the visa happens.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into that a little bit, I suppose. So, yeah, at the moment, your role is general manager for Lego Education International. As I mentioned, you've had other leadership and team leadership roles with Pearson and other companies before that. So, I guess from a sort of top level, in those different experiences, in those different roles, what have you found to be important in terms of how you gather your teams? And yeah, where have the challenges come, and what have you experienced that have sort of helped with those challenges as well?
I think I've been really lucky. So the teams where I've felt most sort of seen and the strongest connection between the people on the team have been where the leader of that team has committed strongly to offsites and the idea of gatherings, And I remember the first team where I was working at Pearson, the first team where I really felt that we built something special as a group of individuals and became a team was when I had a leader, Brad and Wanderer, who took the idea of that offsite very seriously. And we had a coach, the brilliant Sarah Milne Rowe, and I highly recommend her and her writing and practice, and she's written a fantastic book called The Shed Method, which is all about sleep, hydration, exercise, diet, having your, sort of having your foundations in place in order to perform. And we had a sort of pivotal kickoff meeting as a team in Dubai, where we sort of spent time with customers, time on strategy, but mostly on building up trust as a newly formed leadership team. We were based all around the world. In hindsight, it was a group predominantly of men. So I think it was actually quite hard for new female starters. Were sort of joining a group of 8, 9 technology leaders. But I think they were probably the group of sort of the most vulnerable, or the people most open to being vulnerable that I've worked with in my career. And we started with just a process of kind of, sharing your story and sharing your journey. And it was amazing to me coming into something quite new, how open people were willing to be. And I think that's because we'd got outside of an office, we were on neutral territory. It's quite an inspiring place to be. There was probably a bit of jet lag, which always helps get the tear ducts a bit more sensitive. So, people were ready to share and ready to open up. And, we really came out of that. And I was quite shocked how open people had been. And then that sort of became for me a bit of a formula for how to get the best out of a team. And especially when it's a new team coming together. I think a well-designed gathering pays crazy dividends in terms of return on that team strength. So I'm committed to this as a practice. It's something I do with all the teams that I lead, and I'm currently designing one for September, and it's actually going to be here in my house, in my sort of backyard, as it were, which is a kind of a new experience for me. But if I think about vulnerability and sort of showing up as your full self, I've just decided there's no point trying to keep this divide between home and work life. Like, work happens everywhere. Work happens here in my home. It happens in the office. But I'm always hosting people in the office. It's kind of the next step, just to bring them into my house and say, well, if we're going to do some deep work, I've got pretty decent Wi-Fi. I've got some places we can go for some nice walks and experiences. Let's do it here. So, yeah, I'm a sort of definite believer in the power of connection and gathering, and sort of having shared experiences gives you as a team a collective vocabulary and set of memories and things that you can draw upon when times are good or great or really tough. You keep going back to, what happened in Dubai, or what happened in Mexico, or what did we achieve that day in Yorkshire in Tom's kitchen. So, yeah, I'm all in.
I absolutely love that. I've got so many questions to follow up with. So, well, one is we would love to document the outcome of your offsite at your house.
I'll let you know how it goes. I'm excited.
I'm excited for you as well. And I mean, I recall back to, I don't know when it was, maybe tail end of 2020, 2021. That's all a bit of a blur. But we had a really interesting exchange and conversation around this exact topic. And one of the things that stuck in my mind was your use of kind of mini offsites to onboard individuals as well. So you've got someone new coming into your team. The standard practice might be to induct them through all of the sort of compliance slides. Here's our values. But if I recall correctly, you kind of took them and did some kind of hiking experience with them.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool.
Well, that was very specific at the time, I suppose, to lockdown conditions and not being able to be together at all. And I was hiring new people, and we were starting virtually and never really connecting, never like physically connecting. So we'd go through the whole process of, here's our purpose and direction. This is what we want to achieve this year. Here's the sort of KPIs for the business. Here's what I'm looking for you to deliver in your role. But actually, as soon as we physically could, based on sort of restrictions and stuff, I would make sure that we could get together either one-on-one or in a small group and go for a hike, obviously socially distanced, but there was something about sort of setting out on a journey from sort of A to B and talking a little bit about work, but mostly about sort of just the trivial, and then it gets into the deep, and then it gets back to trivial. You know, like I find that a really just a really helpful, healthy thing to do. And so that can be something I'll do with a new starter. It could also be going for a run with a colleague, which again, the old me would never have imagined saying that out loud. But it's something that now I really like doing. That's the Danish impact has rubbed off on me. I think the idea of sort of landing in a new city and going out for a run with someone or a walk or whatever, but someone that you know a little, but you're sort of committing to getting to know them on a slightly different level. That sort of sensation of being either slightly out of breath or inspired by a new landscape or just exploring together, I've found that to open up new types of conversations that you just don't get in a physical or virtual meeting when you've kind of got your work personas on. So yeah, hiking or running or doing something that is kind of shows intent. And I've said, you know, that person said to me, or I said to them, let's spend some time together. I think that's quite a generous thing to say to each other. And I think if it's done rightly and you're both going into it with the right intentions, it can give amazing results. So I'm a fan.
I love that. I love that idea of a sort of gift of your time as well, and you know, both ways. And on that note, big shout out to there's a fantastic female-led business called Go Running Tours. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's entrepreneur's name is Lena, and yeah, she set up a concept for exactly that, colleagues meeting around the world and running in different new cities whilst they're on these kind of trips. So another sort of friend of WorkTripp who I met at Running Remote. So I love what they're up to. So I'm really intrigued by the international nature of your job and how that is interpreted and how offsites are designed perhaps in different cultural contexts and different business contexts and how that plays out. Have you kind of seen that? So you mentioned the kind of running with the Danish influence, and yeah, I didn't know if you had any other examples of when people are designing offsites, bearing in mind those different flavors of what it might feel or look like.
Well, that's a great question, because you know I'm going through the final plans right now for this one at home in Yorkshire. I find that like you need to be, so my teams have always been international. The team I mentioned to you when we got together in Dubai, we were based between sort of London, China, Singapore, and lots of places in between. And we'd gather once every sort of 3 or 4 months. And the team that I lead now, we've got people in London with me, in Denmark, in Singapore, Shanghai, Germany. So, you know, again, very spread. We connect virtually and religiously kind of once a week. And then we will get together physically, hopefully once a quarter or sort of 3 to 4 months. I find when you're designing that offsite, you really have to take care of basics in terms of people. The most pressing question people often have is, what's the dress code? Like, what do I need to pack? And I've learned through some mistakes that you kind of need to be very like directional about, we're going to be hiking, so don't bring any of your smart work shoes. Bring your hiking trainers, and we'll find you some wellies if we need to. But you know, so there's all the sort of things, and I think people deserve and need to know, they need that comfort of knowing, like, when I arrive here, am I going to feel safe and prepared, and like, you know, am I going to sort of be able to show up comfortably? So never underestimate. I've always found when American colleagues come over to Europe, dress code is a big deal. So I don't make light of the fact of, like, give people very clear instructions. For this trip, you will need these things and you'll need to do this preparation. And then I guess because of the wide variety of our sort of languages and cultures, that opens up this whole world of, you know, we could go and explore like a cooking lesson in Spain that might be really sort of feel normal to the guys that live there, but to everyone else, that's like, wow, this is a really deep experience which is going to leave marks, and we'll always remember this particular class that we did and the meal that we sat down for, and that sort of the jokes and the time that we had in cooking this together. So I love the international nature of my team because we can kind of cycle a little bit around the world in our locations, fortunately now anyway. And it doesn't take much to ask someone to bring in a pretty compelling experience that, you know, they can show from their home. Or and another way of doing this is we're having dinners in Yorkshire, and we'll have some sort of, I don't know, loosely managed discussions through those dinners, and we'll do kind of cultural exchange, and we'll talk about the differences between, you know, family life in Yorkshire versus family life in Singapore. And out of that, you get a lot of personal stories. You also get a lot of really helpful context as how business and sort of thinking about users and customers, you can really get some great information exchange. So with my international team, I'm lucky because there's so many sort of compelling backgrounds and experiences. And with the different locations, you can really throw in this fantastic mixture of experiences. So when they come to Yorkshire, we will be very rural and outdoors, and we'll be mucky. But we'll be doing business strategy and coaching practice, and then we'll go and see some schools in the Northeast who are using our products and listen to teachers. But when we go to, I don't know, where we may be in Asia early next year, it'll just be a different flavor of those times of things. But I always have kind of 3 themes to the days. It's one day on business, or, you know, one strand on business, one strand on people and sort of building our connection, and the third strand on customers. And I think you need to have that balance of the 3. And then if you throw in some kind of wonderful local experience, whether that's the hike, or it's the great, you know, it's like sleeping on the Great Wall of China, or having some incredible dinner that's in this really off the beaten track restaurant. I just think that that's what sort of stays in people's memories and gets you stripped back to a really different group by the time you finish it.
I love it so much. One thing I was going to ask about your offsite at home is, well, and generally offsites, whether they're in your home, whether, you know, it's this one coming up in the first quarter. I'd really love to kind of get into what is the process. So you mentioned those 3 strands. I'm intrigued to know, you know, is the offsite design, is that down to you? Do you have anyone else on the team that helps with the orchestration of the offsite, both operationally and then from a point of view of like the impact and the design and that aspect of it as well?
So I guess the intent and the sort of high level planning comes from me. I have a brilliant assistant, of course, who then helps me actually make it a reality. And right now he is working out minibus hire and like logistics of flight arrival times and how the hell we're going to get everyone in sort of one window of useful time, and then, you know, the restaurant booking. So it's definitely a multi person facilitation. I guess I've been doing, I've done enough of them to know that if I'm not prepared, it's going to be bad. And I think I don't underestimate the facilitation side of it. So for me, it's something that takes very intentional practice and preparation. I definitely call on like inspiration from friends, yourself included. You know, I'll always be asking people, you know, have you been to so and so? What worked here? What worked there? The after effects of it actually is kind of a work in progress in terms of monitoring that. You know, was this effective as a gathering? I think I can see it in the types of organizations I work in. You can look at your staff engagement scores and motivation. You know, can you see people building a deeper engagement to this team? Yes, we do monitor that. In terms of like dedicated follow-up and actions and outcomes of this offsite, I'm quite focused on that because I'm very conscious we're spending company money on, you know, got to make sure that this is actually going into building a more effective, engaged team, therefore more business output and, you know, ultimately productive. But I don't underestimate how much work goes into these things. And so, you know, there's always that very nice feeling of relief when it's done. And then thinking about how you sort of make learnings pull off those specific locations and experiences, that for me is kind of a work in progress in my head in terms of, you know, how do we continue some of those themes that we started around the dinner table in Copenhagen? How do you make that actually live? And I think that's still to be kind of nailed down.
Yeah, amazing. And the kind of the multi-stakeholder approach that you talked about. So one of the things I'm thinking about is the freedom of other team leaders listening in, thinking, I'd love to do that. And then the culture that is needed within an organization to allow that to happen, you know, whether it's in someone's personal space or whether it's you know, a different version of that. How is that sort of manifested, and do you think that's being realized at a team level or at a kind of more at a company wide level, do you think?
That's a good question, because I've worked for bosses and organizations where this has felt quite a natural thing to do. I think I'm definitely sort of pushing, you know, I'm one of the people who's probably at the more sort of adventurous side of how you design your offsites and what goes into them. But then I've been lucky to always have the support of the organizations around me. And I guess that relies on a lot of sort of trust and independence and just a belief that, you know what you need to do to get your team like working at a really great level. I can, and I've heard of and I've seen examples of offsites that feel really draining, where you can see that they've kind of been designed as a formality, and 100 people must gather in X ballroom on a hotel sort of off a ring road for 2 days, and there'll be like a dinner and something thrown in, and actually you can get something out of those 2 days, but that's basically office time just off the site of the office, right? I've been lucky not to work for organizations that do a lot of that. So I hope more and more teams will kind of embrace this as a phenomenal way to unblock things. I think it can be small or big strategy issues. It can be normally sort of meaningful or really big personal or team issues that you don't get through if you're all sat in an office or in a pretty uninspiring location off a ring road. I think you need to get out, and it's the change of outfit, it's the change of mindset. You've got work problems to address, or challenges and opportunities to sort of work on, but you're coming into it with a much sharper, cleaner way of thinking. And I think that comes with location, experience, and just a really dedicated facilitation of, this is going to be different to last week. We're going to do something that is not the norm, and that stays with people. At least it does with me.
And finally, I think we've both got a sort of love of podcasts and good books, just to in the same way to create those new ideas, to get new ideas coming to the surface. I'd love to end with any podcast episodes that you've listened to lately on either this theme or generally in terms of work and engagement, that we can throw into our WorkTripp podcast playlist. And on the same theme, if there are any other sort of team leaders that you think are doing excellent work in this way in terms of engagement, who we should get on WorkTripp introducing, we can go and ask them as well.
Okay. So, well, first of all, shout out, and I'll remind that the title of the book is The Shed Method, and it's by a coach called Sarah Milnrow. I think you've connected with her before. She,
Absolutely.
for me, sets the pace in like facilitation and really stripping back layers from people and getting them into a new way of thinking and engagement. So that's one of the books. The other book I'm really enjoying at the moment, it's not necessarily offsite connected, but it is definitely about stripping back layers of people and forging much stronger relationships. So if you know sort of the radical candor sort of method or formula, it's Kim Scott, and her co-conspirator there was Russ Laraway. And I listened to their podcast a bit, and I quite like the podcast. What I really like is the book that Russ wrote. I think, she rightly presents a lot about radical candor, but her one of her key collaborators was Russ Laraway. So his book is called When They Win, You Win. I don't think it's the best title, but I do think the content is great. It's so clear about sort of how to build meaningful clarity between you and your reports and your teams. And, going from very clear direction to coaching to career support for your team people. And I think it's quite a different way of looking at building trust with your team members. So you providing that very clear direction to what you need to achieve together. You then working on coaching methods to get into really vulnerable ways of talking to each other, but also you understanding where that individual wants to get to in their life. And it can be somewhere a million miles away from the job that they're doing with you right now, but getting to a level of openness where they can say, this is what I want to do with my life. And you then being able to say, well, based on this relationship we have today, I can get you here. Like, I can do this bit of your roadmap with you. To me, that's quite a transformational but very simple way of changing a few things with how you talk with your team. So I'm really enjoying that book at the moment. Podcast, Sophie. I think I was thinking about this, but I'm afraid I've drawn a short. All I've got is cultural. Is just things I've enjoyed listening to. Can I do those?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Right. History of Britpop on BBC Sounds. So we've just had a lot of long car journeys with my kids, and with me taking a vaguely sort of educational angle to what we were going to listen to. So we have playlists of, like, my son has great music taste, so I let him design the playlist. But I've also thrown in history of Britpop, so he actually understands all these bands that he thinks he's introducing me to when he plays them to me, which is kind of endearing. And then, of course, there's sort of the rest is history to fill in some of the gaps of just like my world knowledge. But the podcast that I found most compelling that I listened to recently, believe it or not, was Louis Theroux interviewing Shania Twain. I never thought I would say that. It's the most interesting life story I've ever heard told on a podcast. And I wasn't expecting it. It came up unexpectedly, and it's really stuck with me. And I think the reason I'm calling it out on this is she's a great example of a storyteller who kind of blew my socks off, and I just wasn't expecting it. So I'm going to put that out there.
I am going to finish this and then go and listen to Shania Twain. I mean, if Louis Theroux's dug out that story, it's got to be good, right? So
it's great.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you for all the incredible sharing on offsites. And I'm really looking forward on your behalf to those moments you have with your team around the kitchen table. So well done for putting it all together. And thank you again.
Thank you for everything you're doing. And, I'm a big fan. So good luck with everything. And I'll keep you posted too.
Nice. Thank you very much. Take care.
Always a pleasure to speak.